Fire is the king of destruction. Every crystalline being, from the lowest shardling to the most esteemed ambassador, knows this universal truth. Fire is not to be played with. It consumes and disintegrates, turning our solid, faceted bodies into melted pools of nothingness. From the moment we are old enough to use our sensory spindles, we are taught to avoid flame. We are beings of precision, and precision does not tolerate the chaos of fire. But apparently no one bothered to tell the humans. I was there during the first contact. If you haven't heard the stories, let me tell you it was unlike anything we could have anticipated. I was part of the scouting mission sent to Earth. Back then, it was just another anomaly in a long list of mapped but unexplored worlds. Earth wasn't even a priority for us. It was too hot, too volatile. But something in the data flagged it for further investigation, and as always, it was my team that was sent to check it out. We landed under the leadership of Ambassador Vorel, a seasoned diplomat who had seen his fair share of strange species. He was cautious but confident. I, along with Thyra and Kralix, made up the scouting party tasked with the ground survey. Our mission was simple: gather information, establish contact, and return with enough data to decide whether further interaction was necessary. It seemed like an easy job. We had no reason to believe Earth would be any more dangerous than the other planets we had surveyed, and our Class 7 protective cocoons were more than enough to keep us safe. Or so we thought. The planet, when viewed from space, looked peaceful enough. A swirling ball of green and blue, dominated by oceans and land masses teeming with plant life. It was the heat, though, that made us hesitate. Our instruments beeped in warning as we descended through the atmosphere. The air was thick with dry warmth, and there was something else, something strange and unnerving about the atmospheric composition. I remember standing in the control room of our needle ship, looking at the scanners as the temperature continued to rise. Kralix, our Foundation specialist, muttered something under his breath, his optic nodes narrowing as the data rolled across the screen. "Too hot," he grumbled. "This planet's too close to its star." Thyra, our quick-footed scout, didn't seem concerned. She was always the adventurous one, ready to dive into danger headfirst. "We've handled worse," she said with a shrug. "Besides, that's why we've got these cocoons." She wasn't wrong. Our cocoons, made from the densest crystalline alloys, were designed to withstand extreme conditions. They could shield us from the heat, but I still felt uneasy. Something about Earth didn't sit right with me, though I couldn't explain why. When we landed, it became clear that my instincts weren't wrong. The first thing we noticed as we stepped out of the needle ship was the oppressive warmth. Even through the cocoons, I could feel the heat pressing down on us. It wasn't unbearable, but it was enough to make me second-guess our mission. The ground was hard and dry beneath our feet, and the air shimmered in the distance, giving the illusion of movement where there was none. We moved slowly, ever cautious. Thyra, as always, was eager to explore, darting ahead of us to scout the area. Kralix and I stayed behind, analyzing the data from our instruments. The readings were strange fluctuations in temperature, inconsistent atmospheric pressures. Something wasn't right. Over here, Thyra's voice crackled through the comms, drawing our attention. We followed her voice, cresting a small hill that overlooked a valley below. What we saw there stopped us in our tracks. They were gathered in a loose circle around a large open flame, their bodies moving in time with some unseen rhythm. It was mesmerizing in a way. Their movements were fluid and graceful, almost as if they were dancing with the fire itself. But it wasn't the dance that shocked us, it was the fire. They were so close to it. Flames leapt and crackled, sending sparks into the air, yet none of the humans seemed concerned. They were bare-skinned, with no protective gear, no shielding. Just their soft, spongy bodies, exposed to the intense heat of the inferno. "What are they doing?" Kralix muttered, his voice laced with confusion. "Dancing," I replied, though I wasn't sure. Thyra, of course, couldn't contain her curiosity. She stepped forward, moving down the hill toward the humans, her movements quick and deliberate. "Thyra, wait," I shouted, reaching out to stop her, but she was already gone, her form disappearing into the heat haze. Kralix and I followed, moving as fast as our cocoons allowed. The heat was rising now, even more intense the closer we got to the humans. My sensors were beeping frantically, warning me that the temperature was nearing dangerous levels. But the humans, they were unaffected. Thyra reached the edge of the circle, waving her arms in an attempt to get their attention. "You need to move away," she shouted, her voice crackling through the comms. The humans didn't react at first. They continued their dance, moving around the fire with an eerie sense of calm. Then, one of them, a tall male with dark skin, looked up and spotted Thyra. He smiled, a strange, toothy expression that I had only read about in human studies. Before we could stop her, Thyra stepped forward, closer to the flames. She was still trying to communicate, to warn them of the danger. But then something happened that I'll never forget. The human picked up a burning branch from the fire. He held it aloft, waving it in the air like it was nothing more than a toy. The flames licked at his skin, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he laughed a deep, melodic sound that sent shivers down my spine. "Thyra, get back," I shouted, my heart pounding in my chest. But she didn't move. She was frozen, staring in disbelief as the human waved the burning branch in front of her, completely unafraid. The other humans joined in, their laughter echoing through the valley as they continued their strange, ritualistic dance. What are they doing?" Thyra whispered, her voice barely audible through the comms. "They're playing with fire," Kralix said, his tone laced with disbelief. "And they're not getting burned." I could barely believe what I was seeing. Everything we knew about fire, about its destructive power, was being challenged right before our eyes. These humans, these strange, soft-bodied creatures, were not only surviving in the presence of fire, they were thriving in it. They moved around the flames with ease, as if the heat meant nothing to them. Thyra finally backed away, her arms raised in a gesture of peace. The humans watched her with amused expressions, but they didn't stop her. They were curious but not hostile. "Get back here," I muttered, pulling her by her cocoon back toward us. When she returned to our side, I could see her optic nodes trembling. How she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How are they not burning?" "I don't know," I admitted, my mind racing. "We need to report this to Voral," but before we could make our way back to the ship, the humans began to approach us. Slowly, cautiously, they moved toward us, their curiosity piqued. One of them, the same male who had waved the burning branch, stepped forward, smiling again. He spoke, though we couldn't understand his words. His voice was deep, rich, and strangely calming, though the meaning of his words was lost to us. "They're not attacking," Kralix said, his voice steady but tense. "They're trying to communicate." The human extended a hand toward us, still smiling. I stared at it, unsure of what to do. His hand was rough and covered in soot, the remnants of the fire clinging to his skin, yet he seemed completely unaffected. "They're not afraid," Thyra whispered. "They need the fire." That was the moment it all clicked. These humans, they weren't just immune to fire. They thrived on it. Their entire civilization was built around it, their very existence intertwined with its destructive power. I took a step back, shaking my head. "We need to leave." Now Thyra hesitated, her optic nodes still locked on the humans. But now I repeated, my voice firm. She finally relented, and we began our retreat. The humans watched us go, their expressions curious but not hostile. They didn't follow, and for that I was grateful. As we made our way back to the needle ship, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in my chest. We had just witnessed something incredible, something that defied everything we knew about biology and survival. But there was something else, something darker. These humans, they weren't just immune to fire, they commanded it. And that made them dangerous. The days following our initial contact with the humans had been a whirlwind of negotiation and construction. Ambassador Voral, ever the diplomat, had managed to secure an agreement to build our embassy on Earth, a diplomatic outpost that would serve as a bridge between our species and theirs. The humans, eager to establish relations, offered us a plot of land near one of their fire-friendly cities, a place where they had learned to harness and control the very element that terrified us. I had my reservations, of course. Fire in all its forms was a force of death to our kind. The thought of building our embassy so close to it sent chills down my crystalline spindles. But Voral, ever calm and composed, assured us that the location was safe. The humans had promised to help us construct the outer shell of the embassy, ensuring it would be resistant to the environmental dangers we feared so much. For weeks, Kralix, Thyra, and I worked alongside a team of builders to lay the foundation for the new embassy. The humans provided assistance where they could, though their methods were often foreign and unsettling to us. They used machines that emitted sparks and flames as they cut through metal, and more than once I found myself flinching at the sight of their tools glowing red hot. Yet they moved with a practiced ease, never seeming concerned by the potential danger. Despite my unease, the embassy was slowly taking shape. The crystalline structure we were constructing was a marvel of Tyrexian engineering, designed to withstand both the pressures of Earth's atmosphere and any potential damage from its environment. Our builders worked tirelessly, carefully placing each crystal shard to ensure the structural integrity of the building. It was during this time that we first heard the distant rumble. I remember standing near the edge of the construction site, watching as Kralix directed the placement of a large crystal slab. The sound was faint at first, barely noticeable over the hum of the machines and the crackle of the ever-present fire pits that dotted the landscape. But as the minutes passed, the rumble grew louder, deeper, and more ominous. "What is that?" Thyra asked, her voice tinged with concern. She stood beside me, her optic node scanning the horizon for any sign of the source. I frowned, adjusting the sensors on my cocoon to get a better reading. "I don't know. It sounds like a sudden gust of wind hit us, carrying with it the acrid smell of smoke. The temperature, already high due to the proximity of the fire pits, began to rise even further. My sensors beeped in warning, alerting me to a rapid increase in heat. "Something's wrong," I muttered, my heart pounding in my chest. I turned to Kralix, who had stopped his work and was now staring up at the sky, his large frame tense. "Kralix, do you?" Before I could finish my sentence, the rumble turned into a roar. The sky, which had been a dull, reddish hue, suddenly darkened as thick clouds of smoke began to roll in from the west. The wind picked up, whipping through the construction site and sending loose debris flying through the air. My cocoon's sensors screamed in protest as the temperature spiked, and I could feel the heat pressing in from all sides. "Get to cover," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the approaching storm. Kralix didn't need to be told twice. He barked orders to the builders, urging them to take shelter in the half-finished structure of the embassy. Thyra was already moving, her lithe form darting toward the nearest shelter as the first embers of the firestorm began to rain down on us. It was chaos. The firestorm hit us with full force, a swirling vortex of flames and smoke that engulfed the construction site in seconds. The wind howled like a living thing, carrying with it burning debris that pelted our cocoons. My sensors were going haywire, flashing warnings about structural integrity and temperature thresholds. I glanced around, trying to find Kralix and Thyra amidst the chaos. The smoke was so thick that I could barely see more than a few feet in front of me. My optic node strained against the swirling darkness, the only illumination coming from the flickering flames that licked at the edges of the site. "Kralix," Thyra shouted, hoping they could hear me over the roar of the firestorm. I caught a glimpse of Kralix's massive form through the haze. He was standing near the base of the embassy, his arms raised as he tried to shield some of the smaller builders from the onslaught. His cocoon was glowing red-hot, the heat pressing in on him from all sides. Even from a distance, I could see the cracks forming in the outer layer of his cocoon, small fissures that threatened to spread and shatter under the intense pressure. "Kralix, get out of there," I shouted, my voice desperate. But he didn't move. Instead, he stood his ground, his broad back hunched against the wind as he tried to protect the others. I began to move toward him, but before I could take more than a few steps, there was a blinding flash of light, a lightning strike, cutting through the smoke and flames like a blade. It struck the top of the half-constructed embassy, sending shards of crystal flying in all directions. The shockwave hit me like a physical force, knocking me off my feet and sending me sprawling across the ground. My cocoon hissed in protest, its outer shell cracking as I skidded across the burning earth. For a moment I lay there dazed, my vision swimming as the world around me seemed to blur and distort. Then, through the haze of smoke and pain, I saw Kralix fall. The lightning strike had shattered the upper levels of the embassy, and the debris had rained down on him. His cocoon, already weakened by the heat, had finally given way. I watched in horror as his massive frame crumpled to the ground, his outer shell cracking and splintering as the flames closed in around him. "No," I screamed, struggling to my feet. I could feel the heat pressing in on me, the air thick with smoke and ash, but I didn't care. All I could think about was reaching Kralix. I stumbled forward, my cocoon groaning under the pressure as I fought against the wind and the fire. The heat was unbearable now, my sensors flashing red as they warned me that my cocoon was reaching its limit. But I couldn't stop. I had to reach him. When I finally reached Kralix's side, I saw the full extent of the damage. His cocoon had been shattered by the debris, leaving his crystalline form exposed to the flames. His once solid carapace was now cracked and melting, the edges of his body dissolving under the intense heat. "Kralix," I shouted, dropping to my knees beside him. He turned his head to look at me, his optic nodes dim and flickering. "Get out of here," he rasped, his voice barely audible over the roar of the firestorm. "I'm not leaving you," I snapped, my hands shaking as I tried to pull him to his feet. But he was too heavy, and my own cocoon was failing. I could feel the cracks spreading along the surface, the protective layers breaking down under the relentless assault of the fire. "Kralix, please," I begged, my voice choking with smoke and desperation. But it was too late. With a final, pained groan, Kralix's body gave out. His carapace cracked and shattered, his once solid form reduced to a pile of melted crystal. The flames surged forward, consuming what remained of him, leaving nothing but ash in their wake. I staggered back, my vision swimming as the heat pressed in on me from all sides. The firestorm was relentless, the wind howling like a living thing as it tore through the construction site. The embassy was gone, reduced to a pile of rubble and ash. The builders were nowhere to be seen, either dead or scattered in the chaos. I knew I had to get out of there. My cocoon was failing, the outer layers crumbling under the heat, and if I didn't move, I would be next. But where could I go? The firestorm had engulfed the entire area, and the nearest shelter was too far away. I glanced around, my heart pounding in my chest as I searched for any sign of safety. That's when I saw them. Through the smoke and flames, I caught a glimpse of movement. At first, I thought it was the builders, perhaps Thyra, trying to find cover. But as the figures came into view, I realized with a shock that it wasn't my team. It was the humans. They were moving through the firestorm with a strange, eerie calm. Their soft, spongy bodies were exposed to the flames, yet they seemed completely unaffected. They walked through the inferno as if it were nothing more than a mild inconvenience, their expressions calm and unbothered. I watched in disbelief as they moved toward the ruins of the embassy. One of them, a tall male with soot-covered skin, glanced in my direction, his eyes locking onto mine. For a moment, we simply stared at each other, the roar of the firestorm swirling around us. He smiled. That same strange, toothy smile I had seen during our first encounter. The same smile he had given us when he waved a burning branch in our faces. But this time, the smile sent a chill down my spine. These humans, they weren't just immune to fire. They were creatures of it. They moved through the flames with ease, their bodies adapted to the very thing that terrified us. I wanted to scream, to run, to get away from these fire dancers. But my cocoon was failing, my legs trembling beneath me as the heat pressed in on all sides. I knew I wouldn't make it. Not this time. But then something strange happened. The human, still smiling, gestured toward me. He raised a hand and the flames around me seemed to part, as if he were commanding them to move. The heat lessened, the pressure easing just enough for me to catch my breath. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating. But then I saw the other humans doing the same, moving the flames with a strange, almost supernatural ease, guiding the firestorm away from the ruins of the embassy and creating a path of safety. I didn't understand. I still don't. But I took the opportunity. With the last of my strength, I staggered forward, following the path the humans had created through the firestorm. The wind howled behind me, the flames licking at my heels, but I kept moving. By the time I reached the safety of a nearby building, I collapsed, my body trembling with exhaustion and fear. My cocoon, now cracked and barely holding together, hissed as it cooled, the outer layers crumbling away. The last thing I saw before I lost consciousness was the tall human, standing at the edge of the firestorm, his smile still etched into his soot-covered face. It was during the construction of our embassy that everything went wrong. The humans had offered us a plot of land near one of their fire-friendly cities to build our diplomatic outpost. Vorel, ever the diplomat, accepted the offer, despite my warnings about the dangers of being so close to a fire-dependent society. Kralix and Thyra, along with a team of builders, began the process of constructing the embassy. I stayed behind to oversee the project, though I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to go horribly wrong. And then the firestorm came. It started as a distant rumble, barely noticeable over the crackling of the fires that dotted the landscape. But within moments, the sky turned dark and the wind began to howl. The air was thick with smoke, and the temperature skyrocketed. "Get to cover," I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of the storm. But it was too late. The firestorm hit us with full force, flames leaping across the landscape, consuming everything in their path. Our protective cocoons, while designed to withstand extreme heat, were no match for the intensity of the firestorm. I watched in horror as the crystalline structure we had spent weeks building began to crack and shatter under the pressure of the heat. Kralix, ever the brave one, tried to shield the builders with his body, but it was no use. The flames tore through him like he was made of paper, reducing him to a pile of melted crystal. I barely made it to a nearby building before the fire engulfed the construction site. The humans, for their part, were calm. They moved through the flames with ease, their bodies seemingly unaffected by the heat. I collapsed inside the building, my cocoon hissing as it cooled. My sensors were screaming, warning me that the temperature was still too high, but there was nothing I could do. The embassy was gone. Our mission was a failure. In the aftermath of the firestorm, we were forced to retreat. Vorel, ever the diplomat, managed to salvage the situation, negotiating with the humans to rebuild the embassy in a safer location. But the damage was done. We had learned the hard way that humans were not like us. They were creatures of fire, beings who thrived on destruction and chaos. And I knew, deep down, that we could never truly understand them. As I watched the humans rebuild our embassy, their hands moving deftly through the flames, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. They were too powerful, too unpredictable, and I couldn't shake the feeling that one day they would turn that power against us. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel. For every comment that says we will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.